In the name of God. Another phonological process is lengthening. In Russian, vowel length is allophonic. It means that it doesn't create any definition in meaning. And we don't have two words which their differences in meaning is because of their length. And it is allophonic. Stressed vowels are longer than unstressed vowels according to their nature. For example, the stressed U of ruki means hands is longer than the unstressed U of ruki means of a hand, while the stressed E of the latter is longer than the unstressed E of the former. For example, here the U is stressed and we pronounce it as ruki means hands, and here the E, the last vowel, is unstressed. And in this word, the last vowel is stressed, and the second vowel and the first vowel is not stressed. Therefore, we pronounce it as ruki, means of a hand. And here, if you pay attention, the lengthening create a definition in meaning, and these two words are different from each other just because of their stress position and because of their lengthening. Lengthening may also affect phonemic vowel length. Vowel length is phonemic in Latin. It means that it carries a definition in meaning, like here, which these two words are different from each other just because of the length of their vowel. Here you can see some example of Latin, which the vowel length is phonemic in this language. It means that it carries a definition in meaning. Here we can see some pairs of this the Latin example in 35. Okay, we have os means mouse, and here we have os mean bound. These two words are different from each other just because of the length of their vowel. Here we have the length vowel, and here we have the short vowel. This symbol show length, and we put this symbol aside and in front of the vowel which is length. Therefore, we pronounce it as os, mean mounts, and os, which is short, means bounce. Here, this the length is phonemic, phonemic because it causes that these two words differentiate just because of this length, and they have the different meaning. Here we have other example. Hic means here, hic means this, which is we applied it for masculine. Other is portra, means gate in ablative form, and porta means gate in nominative form. Please pay attention to this data. This shows that length is a phonemic feature for the data in the Latin, which cause these two words and different from each other in terms of length, which affect their meaning. Nevertheless, vowels are lengthed in certain environments, such as before the sequences like NS and NF. Other matter is the length for vowels because of their environment. When the vowel occur before the sequences, the consonant sequence like NS and NF cause the vowel became length. Compare the short vowel of the prefix in means not in the left column of 36 here, with the length vowel of the same prefix in the right column. Okay, here. Please pay attention to this data. As I told you in this text, in the above text, I told you that sometimes the environment cause some vowel be lensed, like here. In Latin, before such a consonant cluster like NS and NF, when the vowel occur between these two consonant cluster, we have the lengthening of that vowel, like here. Please pay attention to the first vowel, which is E, in the word in left column and the right column. Here we have in humanus. Here this E is short because according to its environment it can be lensed, and it is short. In humanus means in human. And here we have in sanus. This sign, as I told you, show the lengthening of the vowel. And here we have a lensed vowel, which is E. In sanus means mad. As I told you in this text, when the vowel occur before such a consonant cluster and S, it will be lensed, like here. But here in this word we don't have such a consonant cluster. Pay attention to other examples. We have inimicus, mean unfriendly, which this vowel is not lensed and it's short because we don't have the environment for the lensed vowel. But here in this word we have infelix, means unhappy. And here, because we have NF, the consonant cluster of NF, which we mentioned in this text, this vowel will be lensed because of this environment. Another matter is compensatory lengthening. A special form of lengthening is known as compensatory lengthening, which often results from deletion of a consonant. A compensatory lengthening happens when we delete one consonant, and this compensatory lengthening is common in some languages. For example, in Kurdish or Persian, sometimes we delete the stop and fricative glottal stop and glottal fricative consonant at the end of the word, and instead of to compensate that deletion, we lensed its before vowel. The lengthening in 37 occurred historically in Latin. The vowel is lensed in compensation for the loss of the S that originally followed it. Here we have cosnus, means gray. We delete this consonant, and to compensate that deletion, we have the lensed vowel. Canus. Here we have the compensatory lengthening. We delete this consonant, and to compensate that deletion, we have the lensed vowel. This vowel is short at first, and by deleting this consonant, it will be lensed. Other example, cosmis. Here, by deletion se, we have comis. And other is fidelia, which we delete se, and we say that fidelia mean pot. In this language, the deletion of se is common, but in Persian and in Kurdish, we have the deletion of glottal and fricative stops. fricative and stop glottal deletion. Other phonology process is shortening, which is opposite of lengthening. While the vowels of English like b, beat have roughly the same length, the vowel of beat is shorter. In general, a vowel is shorter before a voiceless consonant. A vowel is shorter before a voiceless consonant than it is either word finally or before a voiced consonant. With the diphthongs like I and O, the vowel is noticeably raised to a mid-vowel A as well. Compare the example in 38. I want to repeat this point that in general a vowel is shorter before a voiceless consonant. When a vowel occurs before the voiceless consonant, it is short, but then when it occurs at the end of the word or before a voiced consonant, like right and writer, right and writer. Here, this vowel occurs before the voiceless consonant, which is T, and we say that right, which is short. Then here, which we have ride, which is length, because it occurs before the voiced consonant, which is D. Okay, in the left column, here we have right, which is short vowel because it occurs before the voiceless consonant, but here we have the length vowel because it occurs before the voiced consonant. These two words are the same with each other, but for T and D. But in here we have other example, which is writer and rider, and it is true about these two words again. In writer, we have a short vowel. Okay, you can see it's phonetic form. As I told you, for showing the phonetic form, we use the square bracket at both sides of that word. And here we have rider, which is length vowel because it occurs before the voiced consonant. Notice that the raised and shortened version of the diphthong appears in rider as well as in right, even though the following segment is the voiced flap re, allophone of T. We will return to this question in section 2.8.1. Okay, until now I explained some part of some phonological processes according to the generative phonology. In phonology, like other aspects of language, we have so many approaches. For example, in syntax, we have minimalist approach. In phonology, we have optimality theory, and we have generative theory and others, nonlinear theory. Some approaches are common in some aspect of language, and those process which I told you, and that rule which I showed you in the previous session was common in generative phonology. Generative phonology has so many advantages than another approaches like taxonomic phonemic. Here we want to say the problems with the phonemic analysis with the taxonomic phonemic. In taxonomic phonemic, we just classify and group the consonant and vowel. And according to this approach, which was the taxonomic phonemic, we had some problems which I want to explain them for you but we don't have such a problem in generative phonology. One of the matter is neutralization. Please pay attention to this matter because it needs your attention. Maybe it be hard for you, and you should read it sometimes about 2 times or 3 times to learn it. Maybe the theory here. The following, I want to explain the problems with phonemic analysis, which occur for neutralization. And I want to say the advantages of the generative phonology to fix this problem. The theory of phonological analysis that divides language sounds into contrasting groups is known as taxonomic phonemics. We taxonomy the sound, since it provides a taxonomy of the sounds of the language. It was the common approach before the generative phonology. The theory of phonological analysis that divides language sounds into contrasting groups is known as taxonomic phonemics, since it provides a taxonomy of the sound of the language. While this theory can offer considerable insight into the phonological structure of a language, it has inherent limitation. Okay, here we want to put aside this approach because as this approach is valuable, but it has some limitation, and I want to introduce its limitation. These limitations can be overcome only by a more sophisticated form of analysis. These limitations in taxonomic phonemics can be overcome only by a more sophisticated form of analysis, which is generative phonology, which we explain it in chapter 4 in details. One type of limitation in this theory, in the taxonomic phonemic theory, occurs in overlapping distribution, which I explained it before for you. Illustrated in the Spanish distribution of the trill re. We discussed this matter in the flap re in the data of 17. If you want, you can refer to this data. And diagram in 19. Okay, the first limitation occurs in overlapping distribution, which you can see its data about the Spanish distribution of trill re and flap re in data in 17 and diagram in 19. Because these segments contrast in the intervocalic environment, phonemic theory assigns them to separate phonemes, but they were not the separate phoneme. They were not belong to separate phoneme. They were the allophones of just one phoneme. Because this segment contrasts in the intervocalic environment, just is in the intervocalic environment, the phonemic theory assigned them to a separate phoneme. Once this assignment is made, phonemic theory doesn't contain rules governing their distribution. This theory couldn't give a rule for such a distribution. Rules in phonemic theory can only state the distribution of the allophones of a phoneme. Okay, it is one of its limitations, which this theory, which is phonemic, can only state the distribution of the allophones of a phoneme, not about 2 or 3 or more phoneme. Therefore, the rules in phonemic theory can be stated just distribution of allophones of just one phoneme. They cannot substitute one phoneme for another. Nevertheless, the occurrence of the trill re in word initial position to the exclusion of the flap re appears to be a rule-governed phenomenon. It has a rule, but this theory cannot explain it, cannot give a rule for it, because it has so many limitations. However, the phonemic slogan means once a phoneme, always a phoneme. Here it is a slogan of phonemic, the taxonomic theory, which once a phoneme, always a phoneme. This laws a rule expressing this fact. Okay. The occurrence of the trill ray in the word initial position to the exclusion of the flap ray appears be a rule-governed phenomenon, but phonemic slogan is once a phoneme, always a phoneme. A second serious limitation of a phonemic theory is its inability to deal insightfully with the very common phenomenon of neutralization. Another limitation in the phonemic theory is about the processes and phenomena of neutralization. Therefore, one of its problems was about the overlapping distribution, which it can't give any rule for that. It has some limitation. And others is about the neutralization. Neutralization occurs whenever two or more distinct underlying segments have the same realization in the particular environment. I told you something about underlying representation in the previous session when I explained the rule for some words, for derivation of some rules. I told you about the underlying segments which occur at the first step of the derivation. Neutralization occurs whenever two or more distinct underlying segments have the same realization in a particular environment. When we have their phonetic representation, they became that two or more distinct underlying segment becomes the same and have the same phonetic representation. In discussing the allophones of English T in 24 and 31, you can refer to this number and you can review their data again. We noted that one of the allophones of T is the flap re. I think I explained it in session 6, which we noted that one of the allophones of T was flap re. But the flap re is also an allophone of the voice stop D. As in the case of Spanish trill, re and flap re, there are environments in which T and D contrast. For example, at the end of the word, in the hit and hit. But if a participle suffix is added to each of these, like hitting and hitting, the words are pronounced the same, since the alveolar stop is converted to a flap in both cases. And these two distinct sounds, which were different from each other in underlying representation, they became, both of them, converted to the flap in the phonetic representation. We call it as neutralization. While the phonemic theory commonly employs a branching diagram such as the one we gave in 3, which we repeat it in 39, to illustrate allophones, where a phonemic unit branches into two or more phonetic units. It doesn't allow diagram in which a single phonetic unit is connected to two or more phonemes, as in 50. It is the other problem of phonemic theory. I think it is heard, and I want to repeat it again. While phonemic. I told you that one of the problem and limitation of phonemic theory is its neutralization, and I want to explain it for you. While phonemic theory commonly employs a branching diagram such as the one we have in 3, which we repeat in 39 to illustrate allophones, where a phonemic unit branches into 2 or more phonetic units. It doesn't allow diagram in which a single phonetic unit is connected to 2 or more phonemes, as in 50. But such diagram is legitimate in a theory based on rules, however. Okay, pay attention to these 2 diagrams, 39 and 50. In 39 we have P. As I told you, when we put 2 slashes in both sides of sound, we consider it as the underlying representation or a phonemic representation, which we have P, and we have 2 allophones of this P, which is plain P. This square bracket show the phonetic representation, and a separated P. These 2 are the allophones of this phoneme. The taxonomic theory or phonemic theory doesn't have any problem with such diagram, because these 2 allophones related to just one phoneme, and it is okay for phonemic theory. But here, this theory have problem with this diagram in 50. We have 2 phoneme, T and D. We have 2 phoneme, T and D, which they are different from each other, and they are the separate phoneme. We consider them as a phoneme. Pay attention to their diagram. The common diagram for phonemic theory is this diagram, which we have just one phoneme and we have the allophones of that phoneme. But here we have these 2 separate phoneme. This type of allophone is okay. T is the allophone of T, and it is okay too. D is allophone of D. But problem is here. We have problem with such allophone, which is flap re. This flap re is allophone of these 2 separate phoneme. It is the problem of phonemic theory. It is a neutralization, as I told you in this example, both heading and heading, which this T and D convert to flap re in the phonetic representation. The problem of this phonemic theory is that this type of allophone is related to this separate phonemic sound. And here these dots show other allophone of these 2 phoneme. This is because phonemic analysis starts from the bottom up. It begins with the phonetic material and groups phonetically similar elements into phoneme if they are in complementary distribution or free variation. That was the way, and that was the method of phonemic theory, which those phoneme who were in complementary distribution or free variation, they consider them as phoneme. But a diagram like 50 here, this diagram, implies that a phonetic re, as I told you here, the classifying of the phonemic theory is from the bottom up. It means that from the phonetic representation to the phonemic one. The way which we classify the elements in phonemic theory is in this way. For example, we have a plain P and aspirated P, and we find their phonemic form. But here we have problem with such a re. But a diagram like 50 implies that a phonetic flap re could sometimes be assigned to t and sometimes to d. The analysis would be indeterminate. There are two possible solutions with phonemic theory for this problem. One is to assign flap re always to one or the other phoneme, which would be arbitrary. Arbitrarily, we assign this re to t or d, to one of them, to solve this problem. One is to assign re always to one or the other phoneme, which would be arbitrary. Let us suppose that re is assigned to the d phoneme, and the grounds that the flap is more phonetically similar to d than to the t. Okay, we consider it as the allophone of d, not t. Then we would say that heat has two arbitrary alamovs. Phonemically, heat that appears in heat, and heat that appears in heating. These two alamovs cannot be related by phonological rules. They may be given a single representation on a morphological level, a representation that has been called morphophonemic. Okay, we have other representation which we called it morphophonemic, which we describe them according to the morphological rules. We have the morphological level, which we consider them as morphophonemic. This might be represented as heat with a capital T, where the morphophoneme T, capital T, with this double slant line, both sides of this sound, is realized as either the phoneme T or the phoneme D, depending on its environment. This phonemic series has problem with the diagram in the phonology to showing this to solve this problem. Therefore, we suppose a morphophonemic level for this problem, which in morphophonemic level we consider these two allophone as T with capital T and with double slant line in both sides of that, and we consider it as a morphophonemic level, which is realized as T or D. It depends on its environment. This view commits us to setting up three levels of representation: the morphophonemic, the phonemic, and the phonetic. Okay, according to the description of this phonemic theory to solve this problem, consider other level to explain this matter. We have the morphophonemic, phonemic, and phonetic level to solve this problem, which we show it in 51. We temporarily introduce the notation of the double slant line. It means that these two lines here to represent morphophoneme and the morphophonemic level. A rule is required to replace the morphophonemic T by the phoneme D in the environment intervocalic when the second vowel is unstressed. The phonemic theory to solve the problem of considering just allophone to the separate phoneme and to solve this phonetic representation, consider one level which is morphophonemic, which it said that in morphophonemic we have one level in that we have one form, which is here is capital T instead of these two phoneme, which it can be converted to T or D based on its environment, and we show it by the double slant line. Here we have other diagram for showing that. Here it explains the term of alamov, which is used in this book, refer to different forms of a morpheme that are not phonologically predictable. Phonologically predictable forms of a morpheme are referred as alternates. Morphophonemic level, which we consider T in this way: heat. It is the underlying representation, the morphophonemic levels of heat, heating, heat, heating. In phonemic level, we have heat, heating, heat, heating. Which in phonetic level, we have heat. This T is related to this T, and we don't have any problem. We have hearing, which this D convert to re, and heat and hearing. In phonemic level, according to by considering this morphophonemic level, which we consider flap re in this way in morphophonemic level as a capital T, and here as a D. They are different, but here in phonemic level they are not different. This T is related to T in phonetic level. This re is related to D, D is related to D, and re is related to D. And if you consider this diagram, here this flap re is just the allophone of D, not in T. And based on this diagram, and by considering the morphophonemic level, he wants this theory wants to solve its problem. It should be emphasized that the only motivation for setting up the phonemic level is to maintain a single level where all and only the contrastive sound of the language appear. Because T and D contrast in some environment, for instance in heat and heat, they must be represented as such phonemically everywhere they contrast, even where the apparent contrast is completely predictable, as in heat and heating. The second solution within phonemic theory would be to give the flap re phonemic status on its own. This would have the same unfortunate consequence as assigning this sound arbitrarily to one of the sound which it realizes. And moreover, it would require the inclusion of an additional phoneme in the system whose appearance is always predictable. In fact, this solution would require both heat and heat to have arbitrary alamovs in 32. The rule required in this solution is that the morphophonemes T, I told you that we show it in double slant line, and D are replaced by the phoneme re in the environment intervocalic when the second vowel is unstressed. We have morphophonemic level heat, heating, heat, heating. In the phonemic level we have heat, hearing, heat, hearing, which in phonetic level they are related to their own phoneme. Here this re is related to the flap re in phonemic level, and D is related to D, and re is related to re. It is another solution. This solution doesn't require the morphophoneme T. Okay, here we don't need the capital T. But like the solution illustrated in 50, it requires that neutralization take place between the morphophonemic and phonetic and phonemic levels. Generative phonology, as detailed in chapter 4, eliminates the necessity of setting up extra level and extra elements morphophonemic like T or phonemes like R. Simply by dropping the requirement that grammar provide a level where all and only the contraditive element appears. Okay, until here we have a problem with the phonemic theory. It may be hard for you. You should read it about 3 or 4 times to learn it. And ask me your problem. I try to solve it by more example. The difficulties posed by neutralization for taxonomic phonemic theory become more acute when 2 or more processes are involved. For example, in 38, the shortened diphthongs A in writer contrasts with the regular diphthongs I in rider. They must therefore both be present on the phonemic level, despite the fact that they are mostly predictable, as in the differences between right and right. Generative phonology easily accounts for this case with phonemes T and D and I and 2 order rules. Okay, generative phonology solves this problem in a simple way and overcome this problem. We will return to this example in section 6.7.6 of chapter 6. Malekot in 1960 discusses a similar example of this type in many dialects of English, where the word cat and can't differ just in that the first has an oral vowel and the second has a nasal vowel, suggesting that nasal vowels are phonemic in this dialect. Again, generative phonology can propose a phonemic distinction between cat and can't, where the difference resides in the absence versus the presence of the nasal consonant, and the phonetic differences is derived by applying rule that first nasalize the vowel and then delete the nasal consonant. Okay, the generative phonology can explain this process, the changes, by it that at first we have nasalized vowel, and after that consonant, that nasal consonant will be deleted in the phonetic form, in the phonetic representation, and solve it by such a rule in a simple way. The generative solution is clearly more in line with native speakers' intuition, and it is very easy, which we consider these changes according to the generative phonology. Generative phonology also doesn't make a distinction. It is the advantages of the generative phonology than the phonemic theory. Generative phonology also doesn't make a distinction between a morphophonemic level and a phonemic level, and so can dispense with the double slant notation. We don't have such a notation in the generative phonology. In generative phonology, the input, which I told you and I showed you for the rule, that was A in that rule, to the phonological rules is known as the systematic phonemic level, and is enclosed to single stages in derivation after the closed in single slant, as shown in derivation like 13.7. While there may be intermediate stages in the derivation after the operation of each rule, none of the intermediate stages has the theoretical significance to require a specific name. The result of applying all the phonological rules is known as systematic phonetic level. Please pay attention. I will explain the pattern congruity in next session. In this session, we see some things about the lengthening, and I showed its data. As I told you, for better learning of the phonological processes, you should read the article about the phonological processes, about the compensatory lengthening, about the lengthening, about the shortening, by the data of your language, if you want to learn them based on the generative phonology. If you want to learn them, you should search the article of your language, which were done according to the phonology processes of phonological processes based on the generative phonology. You can read something about neutralization and about the problem of the taxonomic and phonemic theory, and you can read some the advantages of generative phonology than the phonemic theory. Please do your task and summarize this session like the before session, and ask me your questions and your problems. I try to solve it by more examples. Thanks.